At IOI, we are dedicated to making our games more accessible by design. As we move forward in our accessibility journey, we aim to enhance our approach while maintaining our current workflows. While our upcoming titles may not be fully accessible yet, we are committed to continuous improvement. We invite everyone to prioritize accessibility in their designs and join us on this journey.
If we jump into it, can you maybe just tell everyone a bit about yourself? So, yeah, how long you've been playing games?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. I'm Steve Saylor, content creator as well as accessibility advocate and consultant. I love being able to play video games, playing it ever since I was a kid, but of course, always as a casual gamer at best. Mainly because I am blind. I considered, depending on which government it is, considered technically legally blind to the point where I basically would be legally considered disabled. But I do consider myself blind. It just I sort of fit on that specific spectrum of blindness where I don't need a cane or a guide dog in order to be able to see, and I do have some assistive technology that I do use in my day-to-day life. But it does still kind of allow me to leave some independence, as it were. And I've been consulting with folks in other studios, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to y'all today. Yeah, I'm big fans of kind of your work.
So, I guess you've been playing games, you say, for a while. Do you usually focus on like single player games, or do you dabble in multiplayer as well? A bit of everything?
Well, it's interesting because yeah, mostly it's single player because that's kind of ones where I can sort of go at my own pace. And multiplayer is kind of one of those where I try to be able to do it. Just right now, there's not a lot of great accessibility in multiplayer. There's a few games that do it and do relatively okay, but right now that's kind of like the next sort of big challenge for accessibility is honestly in regards to the multiplayer side because right now any accessibility in multiplayer could be kind of seen as cheating, and I fully actually don't believe that. I believe that that a lot of accessibility can actually be added in to a lot of multiplayer games right now. All it technically would be doing is just adding information, a second channel information that's already in the game itself. There are certain things that definitely we need to be sort of creatively thought out as far as accessibility there. But yeah, mostly I do stick with single player. I think the only multiplayer game I currently play is Destiny 2. That's a game I've been playing for the past couple years, and so that one's kind of like one of those. It is kind of a solo single player experience, but with a play like PVE sort of setting that I really do enjoy. But I mostly do play that with friends.
Okay, cool. Yes, it's more rather than sort of matchmaking. You just the set activities like going through like the strikes and the raids with them as well, or
Oh yeah, no, I've been able to do it all. The strikes definitely. Raids is a little tricky. I can't necessarily just go in random with random players and do well. I generally will have to jump in with friends, and there are certain tasks that do require some at least sort of quick sort of eye-hand coordination and or at least being able to see certain things. So I can only sort of specifically handle only a specific task in certain raids. But I have completed a few raids in Destiny with sort of my fire team with my friends and still be able to do it in a way where I'm not kind of considered as like a backpack or being carried throughout the whole thing, that I am able to contribute in the raids itself.
okay, that's awesome. Um, so can you maybe just walk us through like if your typical sitting down to play games, what kind of like setup you do beforehand, how long you usually playing for? Is there anything specific you need?
Yeah, it really kind of depends on whether I'm streaming the game or recording the game for my content, or if I'm just playing it by myself. Most part, when for either or, I actually have a 50-inch TV that I'm using right now. It's actually roughly about as far away from my hand to the camera. It's about a foot and a half away from me, and I use that as my PC monitor, but as well as my gaming TV. And what I generally do is I'm sitting, but like I said, about a foot and a half away, which kind of allows me to at least try to be able to see a lot of the user interface or the HUD if there's any smaller text. But a lot of times if there is smaller text, I'm usually having to zoom in or like at least lean in close to the TV in order to be able to see it. So it doesn't necessarily help all the time, but it does at least allow me to be able to play games. And generally, my play sessions are roughly about 2 to 4 hours before my eyes start getting fatigued. It depends on the game. If there are options for say text resizing or HUD like adjustments or anything that kind of it really helps a blind player to play, whether it's screen reader or stuff like that, that can extend my play sessions, because then it's like I like to kind of call it's the difference between active focusing and passive focusing. Active focusing for me is that if I'm having to concentrate on what's happening on screen and having to whether it's just looking and reading at text or specific things that I have to basically be super precise with my movements, or with having to constantly be looking at things, my fatigue kind of comes up faster, and I'm only able to play for like maybe 2 to 3 hours at a time. But any accessibility that's added on to that to help me, like that helps a blind player, essentially kind of removes more into passive focusing, where I can just focus on the gameplay itself instead of trying to be able to focus on the game trying to be able to tell me and show me what to do. And those times that then my play sessions can be a lot longer. Like for example, God of War Ragnarok that just came out. I was able to play for like several hours. I think probably like my longest play session, kind of near the end when I was doing it for review, was probably about like 6 to 7 hours. I played it in one sitting. So, and that's kind of very rare for me to be able to do.
Oh, wow, that's also nice because of all the accessibility options they put in of the text size and HUD rescaling actually adds to that time you can play.
Exactly. Yeah.
So say, there's a new cinematic or gameplay for a new game is sort of shown, sort of like a game conference. What are your like first thoughts? Are there like red flags you're looking for in the gameplay, or like from the company's history to work out whether it's going to be accessible for you, whether you can get excited? What kind of goes through your mind?
There's a lot of that actually, and you bring up a good point about sort of like it's kind of the history of a studio, in that um, generally whenever a studio does try to actively focus on accessibility and not do it in sort of like an afterthought, or do it as in some studios cases they kind of do accidental accessibility, where things that they designed with not accessibility in mind can be actually used for accessibility, and sometimes that has an effect. But if even in the accessibility community, if we see that there's a studio that is actively at least trying to do accessibility, even in its sort of smaller stage, and adding as much as little or as much as they could without kind of being fully accessible. I mean, everyone sort of expects studios to kind of be, this is encouragement for all you here, is that everyone expects now that every studio has to be like Naughty Dog with The Last of Us 2 and just offering all the options and everything that's available. And while that's great and that would be amazing, when it comes to every studio has a different journey when it comes to accessibility, and we like to encourage that whatever you can do now to help you out build out more accessibility in your future, for whether it's a current project or future projects, essentially that's kind of what we're looking out for. So if we see that there is at least a concerted effort to try to add accessibility, even though it may a project may fail in certain aspects of accessibility, at least we can acknowledge that, okay, you were able to try some things and you're able to do certain things well. So, and we will be able to keep an eye out on your next project, or potentially if you're planning to support the game after launch, that we would hopefully be able to see more accessibility being added in, and you would be a studio that we would look out for as far as adding more accessibility, and then hopefully become like the next Last of Us. Again, it's not to discourage you from, hey, if you want to be able to go for this, like your next project, and be as the most accessible as you possibly can, 100% we're on board. But even if you're only able to just do a certain amount, based on certain design decisions that you kind of had to make early on that didn't really have accessibility in mind, and you couldn't be able to sort of change it without having to redesign certain features or aspects of the gameplay, that's okay. Just do the best you can, and we would love to be able to see it. When it comes to sort of like seeing other announcements for gameplay and stuff like that, we generally don't really see a lot of studios kind of putting out any sort of like announcements of gameplay that kind of focus in on accessibility. I would like to kind of see that more. Like if you have accessibility that kind of affects gameplay, like if you have like subtitles already in the system, put the subtitles like what the subtitles would look like at its like highest setting or as all the settings turn on, just to kind of like as part of that cinematic or whichever, just to kind of like or that gameplay, just to show that it's there. It doesn't have to be like hey, look at the accessibility features. It's just included in that so that we can at least be able to see, oh, okay, there actually is subtitles, and this is what it would look like in the final version of the game, and stuff like that. Like being able to also see if there's any HUD adjustments or any text size adjustments. Maybe not necessarily just having it on the default. If there's ways to be able to increase that size and put that in the gameplay, that like kind of helps. Or maybe even have like if the default itself is also large and has a good contrast, like stuff like that, like can really go a long way without necessarily having to say, like I said, hey, look at all the accessibility. That's great if you can be able to do that. Obviously, more information about accessibility you can be able to put out before the game comes out is great. Like again, not to sort of use God of War as the example, but they actually did a really good example. Like this year, before any like marketing ever started happening for God of War Ragnarok, back in May, when there was not even a release date announced, they put out a majority of the accessibility features that were going to be in the game. It wasn't the full list, but it was enough that they could be able to feel confident this is all going to be in the game. And they did that like, and then it was like a couple weeks later when they finally announced, hey, this is the release date. So stuff like that can really go a long way to being able to be a game and a studio that we would want to focus on and take and keep an eye on for potential future accessibility.
Cool. Yeah, because there's we games companies like to keep things secret and hold back off things until they're ready, or just showing off these cinematics to have this sort of rapid burst marketing. But you're saying from your point of view, it's nicer to at least be more aware of what accessibility options are there, so you can get absolutely excited about the game rather than just waiting like a month or two before it's actually released.
Totally, yeah, because it allows players to, or at least disabled players, to kind of figure out instead of because the problem that we have currently is that the only way for us to know whether or not a game is playable for disabled players is we generally would have to buy the game and then try to see if we can be able to play it. But if you release accessibility information about a game beforehand, um, that kind of allow players to basically to think like to wonder, okay, maybe I actually can play this, and that's the biggest thing. It's like of course we want to be involved in the hype of announcement of a game, and that's great, but it's hard to kind of be be excited for it if we don't know if we can play it. So having that information is part of the marketing, but then also having the marketing also be accessible, like having like subtitles in your trailers, or having alt text in any images that you post on social media, like all that kind of stuff is sort of will be seen as sort of basic, but it's like a lot. You'd be surprised at how a lot of studios don't even do that. That can like really kind of go a long way to allow disabled players to be involved in the excitement for it, because we just want to be excited just as much as our friends are. But again, if we don't know if we can play it or enjoy the excitement of it, it's kind of hard for us to be able to get really excited for a game unless like a trusted source like sites like Can I Play That, or some like other accessibility content creator friends, or even myself, are able to do a review of the game beforehand to be able to say, okay, this is what the game is like for accessibility, and that's kind of a little bit difficult, but it's doable. But it's more of the more we can know about whether or not we can play it, that's super key.
But I know you talked about a little bit about in the past, like accessibility by design. So
Mm.
actually, at the design stage, working out how to make features accessible and sort of solve the problems there. And so I was wondering if you could give us the gamer sort of point of view of why the idea of accessibility by design sort of matters.
Yeah, actually, and I can definitely use even Naughty Dog in their approach on that on that exact thing, because Their accessibility journey didn't start with The Last of Us. It actually started much earlier, when they were working on Uncharted 4. When they released Uncharted, or when they were working on Uncharted 4, about halfway through development, there was a disabled player that actually reached out to them and said, "Hey, I would love to be able to play on your next Uncharted, but I can't because of my disability." And it was the first time that they kind of really had heard about a way to, like, for accessibility to even be a thing. And so they kind of brought him in and realized that, oh wow, there's a lot of we can be able to do with this. And so they did include an accessibility menu in Uncharted 4. Now, did it like have a huge amount of options? No, but it was enough that they were able to do partway through development, and including some features they didn't even plan on, like for instance, like The Last of Us's or Last of Us 2, the high contrast mode that's in there actually was the a mode that they had in Uncharted 4 called Thief Mode, where and once you play the game, you can unlock it, and essentially will allow you as Drake to kind of it turns the whole world kind of a monotone gray and like black and white, and Nathan Drake is highlighted in blue, and your enemies in red. And there was a lot of players actually that afterwards, when Uncharted 4 came out, it's like, hey, actually, that's a pretty good accessibility option. So they knew that, okay, if they actually thought about accessibility from the design standpoint, then they could probably do a lot more with accessibility. So they took all that knowledge that they had with Uncharted 4, and then they started with, okay, let's actually like think about accessibility from the design stage. And what that allows you to do, and kind of put a little bit of development cap on, is that it's by doing in the design stage, there's a lot more resources, a lot more people power. There's a lot more sort of like a bit of a budget to kind of like experiment and try different things, that allows you to sort of like figure stuff out for accessibility early on before things are locked in, so that when you get further along in the project, some of the things that the design decisions that you made early on can really help you be able to, when you get feedback or any like kind of within QA or whichever, you can be able to do to adjust later on, and even after launch, if there was any feedback that you got from players, that you can basically go, oh, okay, we can actually go in and change that, and it not be like a huge sort of like task that would cost a lot more resources and time and stuff like that. And you can kind of tell as a player whether or not a game was sort of was thought of accessibility from like from the design standpoint. A case in point, I mean, as much as I did enjoy my time playing the new Saints Row, the problem with that is, and it actually did have a lot of accessibility options in there, but it wasn't really fully implemented in the way. And you can once you kind of get past the trying out the settings and keeping on, you realize how shallow it would actually was, and that it wasn't fully integrated into the experience. For instance, they have in the game high contrast mode, which basically puts a highlight around the characters in like different colors depending on your enemies or allies, and it kind of turned everything into a black and white. But it wasn't fully integrated because when you go in to be able to customize your look or your player, and you had high contrast mode turned on, it kept everything in black and white. So any color adjustment that you made in either your hair color or shirt color or whichever, it was all black and white, and you couldn't do that unless you turn high contrast mode off. If it was fully integrated into the design, then that decision would have been easily kind of like thought of in that design process of designing high contrast mode. And like, oh, okay, we want to have at any given time a player can go in and change their outfit or change their look or whichever. So let's make sure that high contrast mode can be able to either be turned off or adjusted in a way that you can still be able to customize it without having to turn the option on or off. So it's when you can fully integrate as part of the design, that kind of like you start to think about more players that are interested in that feature. And one example I like to kind of give as far as like thinking about accessibility from design. So when you're coming up with an idea for at the beginning and you're brainstorming in the pre-production stage, and you have this idea for this one particular feature that could be really fun, but the way the feature works is that you have to hit a specific button at a specific time using a controller. That's great, and you tested it out. It works. It works fine. It's fun to be able to play, and that's awesome. But when you start thinking about accessibility from the design aspect, from using those parameters, okay, like so you take the button for example. Okay, you have to hit a specific button. Can that button be remapped? Can that does it have to be that specific button? Can it be any? Or can it be a trigger? Can it be a thumbstick? Can it be can it be adjusted in sort of the sensitivity as far as like how do you have to push the button? Do you have to tap the button? Do you have to hold the button? Can you be able to offer those options? And then also as well, okay, so you can figure that out. Then you have to figure, okay, you have to hit the button at a specific time. Can that timing be adjusted? Do you have to rely on that timing for it to be still fun? Can you allow that timing to be turned off? Can you maybe do you want to like what if we adjust the timing of it so that kind of help with players so you'd still be able to hit it and it doesn't necessarily have to be at a very specific timing? It's like okay, great. That's when like then you start thinking about like that accessibility that way, and then you have to think about okay, you want to use it a controller. Well, can everyone be able to use a controller? Can you use it on a mouse and a keyboard? Can you say the adaptive controller? What if it's what if it uses a button or a switch or a toggle? Does it have to be a specific controller in order to be able to use that? When you start thinking about the accessibility in that aspect when you're designing things, that's when you start thinking about more players being able to hopefully find the fun that you initially had when you came up with the idea. It just now means more players can actually be able to enjoy and actually join in on the fun of that feature when you first thought of it.
So talking about that, like you mentioned, like the high contrast mode and the options that it can help. Are there what are those like the common options that usually you're looking for and you're changing when you're playing games?
It can be quite a few, and there's not really right now a sort of a set standard of accessibility, and I don't really kind of want to. I don't know. There's kind of a bit of a mixed bag when people are like in the community are talking about a sort of a standard because we don't want to necessarily have like okay here's a checklist of options that we want you to have, and some studios will basically be like okay we'll just check off these options and then that's it we're done accessibility, and we want to encourage more development and evolution of those standards. However, the options that I personally love to be able to utilize is obviously, like I said, being able to adjust the text size to the that works best for me. Being able to adjust the HUD or the UI, and size wise, but then also contrast as well, because high contrast and text also really helps out and doesn't really blend into the environment. So whether it's having like a background to those text or HUD elements or a shadow or something that kind of like separates it from the environment itself, also really helps out a lot. Also as well being able to if there is a high contrast mode, I usually like to be able to turn that on. If there's screen reader, I love to be able to turn that on. Even subtitles, I love subtitles. Actually, I do prefer it, even though I'm not deaf or hard of hearing. I do actually have subtitles on pretty much all the time in any game I play, and usually with the adjustment of adding a background to it, also increasing the size of the text. I sometimes even have like colors for it, depending on what's available, and also speaker tags so that I know who's actually talking. And there's certain features actually that even some of the like God of War and Last of Us was added in, like directional arrows that basically point to where a character is off screen. I actually do enjoy including that on there. Being able to remap controls if I need to. I usually kind of like look at that. And that's kind of generally the standard settings that I look for in the game, and then anything else that kind of like pops up that's super specific to the game itself, I'd be like, oh, I like to be able to kind of try. I love to be able to try out different options and see what works for me, because sometimes there's options in there that I never would think to be able to use, and then it just turns out to be like really really great. I'm trying to think of examples of that. Excuse me. That isn't already God of War, because I kept mentioning that a lot today. um, uh, oh, actually, yeah. Oh, yeah. Any game that also like or that allows the like I never really used to use this before, but there are certain games that obviously use cursor-based navigation for all their menus, and that's fine, but not necessarily super accessible. So if there's like an option, or if it's just basically built in where you can not only use the thumbsticks to be able to control the cursor, but also use the D-pad to kind of jump between the different sort of points in the menu, or even just on the HUD, can really help out a lot. So anything that kind of like improves sort of like the quality of life, so that I can actually focus on the game itself and not my disability or getting in the way. That's kind of where I'm really like looking for when I'm looking into settings. But those are just kind of the few, and then depending on the game itself, like what type of genre it is, so that's when I'll kind of like look into other different types of settings.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And are there any like little things maybe that aren't 100% focused on accessibility, but that do help out? Like I was watching your God of War review, and you mentioned when you're changing the settings color, the text goes blue to show you which one you've changed, so that you have this long list. It's easy to differentiate. Are there other sort of like minor like game changes that you didn't think about that have helped you?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's interesting because a lot of games now that I play, I generally kind of already kind of notice like what is sort of used for accessibility. There's sometimes that there are games that like you said, the highlights of what whether of what you, if you changed an option in the settings, that like for anything from the default it was sort of highlight in blue. That one actually was kind of a surprise, including actually in that the mini boss checkpoints
Yeah.
in there, where you can turn that on, and that no matter what boss fight you have, you can actually be able to, it'll adjust the checkpoints for you if you die like halfway through, so that way you're not having to defeat an enemy all over again if you do die. So it's stuff like that. I'm trying to think actually of other games that I've been noticing a lot of that lately. Oh, actually, there was one that kind of surprised me a bit. And actually was when I played the game As Dusk Falls. I don't know if anyone here has played that game, but it actually does extremely well for blind and low vision players. They did a lot of accessibility into that, including where what they did was, because like yes, it was kind of designed like it was an Xbox exclusive, but it also was available on PC. What they did was, because a lot of times when for blind players, we don't know whether or not there's going to be a screen reader that's going to be available in the game, unless it sort of like presents itself at the beginning of the game when you first boot it up. And that could be certainly tricky to be able to kind of like figure out how to be able to do that without also like basically turning it on by default, without having to have other players who don't need it to basically to have to worry about having to constantly be turning that off. So what they did, what Tyrion and I did for that was, if you played it on Steam, if you sit on the home on the title screen for, I think it was about like 20-30 seconds, the screen reader will just turn on automatically. And it will turn on with all the settings and all the in-game menus and everything, and you're good to go. But what's interesting, what they did with the Xbox console was, if you had, like, it allows you have to log in with your Xbox profile in order to be able to start up the game. But if you actually had on your Xbox the narrator turned on, just by default, it's just being able to utilize the and navigate the operating system that's on the Xbox. If you have narrator turned on by default, turn on, it will, once the game will recognize that as that's part of your Xbox profile, and it will automatically turn on screen reader for you without you having to even wait a certain amount of time for it to just turn on. It will just know, okay, they've got narrator on Xbox, we'll just turn it on in the settings by default. PlayStation sort of has that with PlayStation 5. They have essentially game modes, but they don't really utilize it for accessibility purposes, but essentially it kind of does the same thing, where there are certain default settings you can kind of turn on in the game modes, and it will, if you're playing a PlayStation 5 game, it will automatically turn those on for you in the settings by default without you having to worry about it. But I haven't really seen them do that a lot lately, other than through Miles Morales. That was the only game that I really tested out to see if it worked, and it does work in that. I haven't really seen them do anything beyond just that. But that was something that I was like, actually, I was like, oh, like it's sometimes it's rare to be able to take me by surprise for accessibility, and that one, and As Dust Falls was one I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool, and it just sort of eliminates a lot of that unneeded sort of, or that sort of have to get like site assistance to be able to turn on the setting and stuff like that, and it was kind of like a nice like quality of life update that was super appreciated.
Oh, that's awesome, especially catching you by surprise. Are there any examples of games that have done it best, where they can show you what changing this is going to do, what's going to be the consequence of turning something on or off? So it's sort of like kind of like previewing things. If there's any game examples that have done that perfectly.
Um, it depends. There are some times where it's not that it will let you know to turn it, like if you're turning it off, this is what it will change. It essentially, there are games that actually include like previews of what this feature will do if you do turn it on. The only time I've ever seen that where it will kind of give you a little bit of like a text box or like description of hey, by the way, like you're turning this on, is generally whenever there's like an assist mode. Both Celeste and I think actually Control did this as well. I don't know if I can't remember if Control actually had a little descriptor for it, but essentially Celeste was kind of like this example where when you turn on assist mode, it actually told you, it actually gave you like a little text box that said, "Hey, by the way, this is not the full intention of the game, or how the game was intended to be played. However, we do recognize that there are definitely certain settings that would enhance a player's experience with this. So this, like, just to let you know, this is what you can be able to adjust. And you can be able to turn this on or off at any given point. It was something like that it was encouraging the player, like, hey, we want you to be able to play this and enjoy this as much as possible. But it also kind of said, like, this isn't the intended experience, but we do, like, it was acknowledging that, okay, yeah, not everyone's going to be able to enjoy or want to be able to play specifically the intended experience. So it's only every time that I've ever seen that kind of a message sort of pop up, especially if you're turning something off or on in that sort of sense. But generally, the only ever times I ever see it is like being able to see what it will look like or what it'll act like when it's turned on, but not necessarily when it's being turned off. If you turn that, yeah, for certain settings.
Okay, but that previewing is fine for you.
Oh,
Are
totally.
they,
Yeah, being able
yeah.
to like see what it looks like especially for like subtitles or text size, or what a feature will look like in the game, like something like a preview or like, yeah, anything along those lines that could be able to at least show what the players get like going to experience by turning this option on. Yeah, something like that would be really ideal.
Okay, and is there like a game that's done it best for you?
Um, it's interesting because there's certain ones that do it but don't do it for everything. Last of Us does that. I think that there's several Ubisoft games that actually have done that as well. I'm blanking on the specific ones, but a lot of the Ubisoft games actually over the past few years, pretty much since 2018, has had a concerted effort for accessibility, and they've been kind of adding a lot of that in. So there are certain things that they kind of include in there. Also, being able to even previews of just like um, of even gameplay features that I've kind of noticed that this is what the like if you unlocking a skill, this is like it gives you a preview of what the skill would actually will do. That also kind of helps as for accessibility, because it allows us to be able to figure out what this skill is that you're unlocking before even turning it on, and like, oh, okay, I want to actually be able to use this skill. So yeah, those are the only ones I could think of off the top of my head. But that is something that it just kind of depends on the game. I think Horizon also does this as well. Um, yeah, yeah. There's not one that sort of like is the golden example of that. But there are definitely some games that do have sort of at least previews of certain items. I think probably The Last of Us is probably the one that does it the most, I think.
Um, so touching on the things, we've talked about what you usually turn on, but as other things or common options that most games miss that we don't realize that are so beneficial, like you're talking like how big subtitles can be, but other things that maybe we forget about
Mm,
that sort of help you out.
Definitely text size. That's something that is constantly a struggle, and I get it. Hey, like we all want to design a UI and a HUD that either is minimalistic or wants to be able to showcase the environment that the games are in. But text size is something that that is often overlooked or often not thought about when designing a HUD or UI experience. And I get it because I mean, most of the time you're like, if you're designing, you kind of have like a TV that's sort of sitting at your desk, and you can basically be like, okay, yeah, the text size looks good to me. But it's very rare that that studios will be like, okay, let's test this out in like a living room environment. If you're sitting like 10 feet away on a couch, what does that text size look like on that aspect? Also, as well as games starting to come up on cloud gaming, whether or just mobile gaming, whether it's playing on the Steam Deck or playing on your phone, or like you're gonna like that text size may look good on a big screen TV, but it may look like absolutely horrible on a smaller screen like a phone. So it's something that is still constantly overlooked, even though it is so super simple to adjust for. But I get it. It's like one of those. It's like, okay, it can be fixed, but it's going to cause a lot of UI bugs if it's not just part of the design process. So I think it's like, as the future of either mobile gaming or cloud gaming or just like gaming in general, if that's not something like I mean, our eyes are only going to get worse. Now they're not going to get better. So the more we can kind of start looking into that now, the better will be. Also, as well, screen reader support. Right now, the current sort of legal sort of specifications is usually kind of reserved for the CVAA, which basically means that like you have to obviously have any time that you want to be able to chat with players, or any communication aspect has to be has at least text to speech, so that players can be able to communicate properly. Yes, that is the legal requirement, but oftentimes the screen reader kind of only goes just like to that point, or only points to an accessibility menu, and then that's kind of it. I'd love to be able to see more screen reader support, and I don't necessarily recommend the way that that The Last of Us actually does it. So Last of Us does have narration for pretty much for every single piece of text that's in the game. But the way they went about it was they had to record all of the text dialogue with a kind of an AI voice, and then included those audio files as part of the download. And I think they said that, yeah, actually, it was they told me that essentially it was like 200 to 400 megabytes of audio files for each language, and that's a lot, and especially for like obviously when you're trying to be able to fit stuff onto a disc, and that could definitely be causing a lot of memory issues. So the best way to be able to do it is if you can be able to tap into like an engine, like a screen reader engine, that would work. Right now, unfortunately, there's no engine that currently has that as part, like you can include that in there. There are plugins for stuff like Unreal and Unity and stuff like that, but if you are creating your own custom engine, that can be I know that can be a sort of very daunting task to include. So but it is something that would really benefit blind players, and then and you'd be surprised about how few games blind players can actually play. And we are desperate for games, and it's because of that feature alone that there is no screen reader support for all text in the game, including in the HUD and in any menu that there is. And it, like, you can basically count on like on just two of your hands, like how many games actually there are out there for blind players. And while it's great currently right now, it is still relatively slow. And so those are the two that I kind of see that are very overlooked. Also, as well, remapping of controls, especially on console, and not necessarily to just remap controls, being able like to because right now a lot of games use pretty much every single button that's on the controller. And yeah, remapping being able to is great, but essentially all you're really doing is you're just swapping out one control over the other. You're still having to rely on the player to hit every single button. So having mouse and keyboard support for remapping, having multiple different inputs for different buttons are great, or having basically a simplified control scheme where do you have to have every single button that's use every single button that's on the controller? Can you keep it as sort of a simplified controls that gives a freedom of options that a player can be able to customize, that they don't have to necessarily use every single like they don't have to use both thumbsticks. If maybe you can design it where one thumbstick could work, or could you maybe only use one of the side of the shoulder and trigger buttons instead of both, or something like that can kind of give a little bit of freedom on a controller or on a mouse, like a mouse and keyboard. Like yeah, especially more for consoles. That definitely is something that is still an issue. And then I think as well, I mean, pretty much as you said, like before, like as far as like subtitles and stuff like that for deaf and hard hearing players, full captions is something that is missed, especially for like NPC dialogue. Actually, and I will say this in regards to the Hitman series, because I know a lot of you worked on it. There was a lot of NPC like environment dialogue that was missed. That it actually kind of adds to the environment and adds to the enjoyment of the game, especially in a game like Hitman. And there was definitely some deaf and hard hearing players that kind of missed out on that if it wasn't mission critical dialogue because it wasn't captioned. So stuff like that like can really go a long way to helping out those players.
Okay, perfect. Actually, I suppose touching back on Hitman, because you mentioned earlier that you weren't able to play it, can you tell us what the blockers were for you in being able to play the Hitman games?
It was definitely the text size. That I know you like, as I did play the original. I think at least the original sort of Hitman, the rebooted of it when you all had done that, and the text size did improve when you release sort of like the kind of remastered maps in Hitman 3. But it was still kind of small, so it was difficult to kind of like really focus in on doing that. And here's the thing, like I absolutely love the amount of stealth options in Hitman 3. That would like I love going stealth in pretty much any game that allows me to do so, because basically and my mission in any sort of game like that, and Hitman 3 actually really did kind of give me this option, even though I had trouble trying to be able to play it. The thing that I enjoyed the most is that any game that allows me stealth is I want to go through an entire mission without anyone ever knowing that I was there. And that has always been my own personal goal. Whatever, like going back as far as Splinter Cell, like original on the PS2, that has been my mission in every single stealth game I can be able to do. Is I want to go in and out of every single mission without anyone ever knowing that I was even there. And if I had to sort of just knock out NPCs to do so, and either hide them in a box somewhere so that they don't even get found, that is great too. And I felt that Hitman 3 actually did an amazing job of providing all those options for me to be able to go at my own pace and do it really well. The tricky part with that was it was difficult to be able to see where NPCs were. Even there, I know that there were there were times you can be able to highlight NPCs, but it was kind of hard to be able to know where they are, because especially when I'm trying to be able to think of every single angle I can be able to get. Like if I'm in a room and I want to be able to think of every single angle I could be able to get out in and out of the room without anyone catching that I'm there, or being able to drop in on someone as they enter a room. It was kind of difficult when I'm taking someone out, and there was always that NPC that kind of comes around the corner that I didn't see or know about, because and I get caught, and it could have been. And it could have been easily sort of remedied if I was able to like know that they were there, or at least know that that was the pattern of that sort of NPC coming through there. I know that's kind of part of the appeal of the game, is that there are definitely like you're not like there's certain NPCs you're just not supposed to know that are coming around the corner, and I know that that's sort of the excitement and of fun of the game. But if I'm planning out an attack, especially if I'm kind of being vulnerable like that, where I'm going down and actually like knocking someone out, I don't like. I want to be able to like look at all the patterns of everyone that's kind of coming around that corner, and if there's someone that I just kind of missed because I couldn't be able to see them to tag them or whichever, that would be really difficult. So what I love to be able to see what if there's a similar sort of idea that you're going for, of course, working on 007, I can see on the screen that you have there. So I know that's the game you're working on. If there's something like a high contrast mode that can really help out with that, and maybe there's a way you can do that still works within the game, like including that part of the narrative. Like I don't know if it's a device that you can get from Q. Like I mean, I love the James Bond franchise, by the way, so that like it definitely I love being able to chat about that if you want me to. But yeah, Q is like having a device from Q that kind of turns sort of like a thermal mode on or something like that kind of like that kind of gives you turns on like a high contrast mode anytime you want to use it, but it being a default option pretty much if or an option you can turn on at the beginning of the game, that can really help out a lot. And also as well, sometimes it was in the Hitman games, there was a lot of dark environments, and that kind of also added to the lack of contrast, being able to see when enemies were nearby. But then also as well, like I mentioned, having the full captions of a player that's kind of near, like that, whether it's footsteps or dialogue, that can also help with that as well. And yeah, essentially, but then also too, and this kind of like a sort of an outside thing of my own disability, was that I found a problem with Hitman, was that while there was a many choices to sort of tackle a particular mission, I did miss that there was a sort of a simplified way to be able to complete that mission, especially when I'm like trying to figure like stuff out from the beginning. I liked actually the tutorial that you had in the boat, that kind of obviously it showed what options were available and what like how you be able to sort of you can accomplish said mission, and that's great. But and then after that you're kind of just left to your own devices, and I know that that's sort of a way to be able to kind of like show you, okay, this is the different ways to tackle this particular sort of objective. But having something like that kind of as a mode that you can be able to kind of turn on, that you can still be able to like you can adjust, maybe basically kind of have it creating an assist mode for Hitman, or that would have really kind of helped out and actually kind of at least allowed me to try out the missions, do it in a fun way. But then if I want to go back and be able to try out different options, I can turn the assist mode off, or like allow me to go back in and try certain things without the fear of, did I screw up because I missed on one particular thing. So sorry, I know I rambled quite a bit on that, but I was just like, those are the things that I enjoyed, but then also that I missed not having in Hitman.
Are you aware of sort of any type or sort of category of disability that still accessibility-wise don't have a lot of great options? So even like in The Last of Us and God of War, if there's still sort of some disabilities that maybe are underrepresented in the accessibility-wise?
I would say probably the two that definitely don't get a lot of attention on is more specifically blind disabilities, and those with cognitive disabilities. And cognitive disabilities is kind of one of those. It's like it could very easily be adjusted based on a lot like a kind of the default for those is like being able to turn off camera shake or motion blur, or being able to adjust the field of view, like stuff like that, and also like turning down any flashes that are in the game, for those who potentially are prone to seizures. Like a warning is fine at the beginning of the game, yes, but you kind of want to make sure that you don't accidentally trigger any seizures. And unfortunately, with a lot of those who are prone to seizures, they may not know that they would be prone to seizures unless something triggers them. So being cognitive, or at least aware of that aspect, you kind of want to be able to avoid. And there's not a lot of there are some times where games will include those options, but there's sometimes where it's not enough. Like if, for instance, actually even God of War had to actually add in a patch later on to turn off sort of the shaky cam, kind of like a kind of handy cam sort of that they had in the game. They actually had to turn off the wobble so that doesn't basically get anyone prone to motion sickness, and that's kind of also that an option that that is missed for cognitive. And then blindness essentially is kind of like what I had mentioned before, like text size adjustment for contrast and blind and screen reader support and stuff like that. Those are the two that are still kind of missing a lot when it comes to accessibility. And there are definitely some aspects in deaf and hard hearing and motor disability that are missed, but for the most part, they can, like a lot of games do include stuff like subtitles is definitely kind of a given in pretty much every game now. But the things that are missing in regards to that is just options to adjust those subtitles instead of just turning subtitles on or off. Like it's just more of adjustments on those sides. But the ones that are definitely missing features are definitely blind and cognitive players.
I suppose anything we didn't ask, or anything you want to tell us, I guess that we can do, that we can improve on.
Without obviously knowing any specific release details of what you're working on, with obviously with 007, I will say this: I'm super excited for that. I thought that when you guys made that announcement of working on a James Bond game, I'm like, there is no other studio that I could have thought to be able to work on a James Bond game than IO. So like I am like kudos, and I'm so excited to be able to play with what you're working on. But knowing that also as well that you definitely have supported your games post launch, and I would encourage you to that even if you weren't able to include a lot of accessibility in launch, it is never too late to add accessibility. If I would love to be able to see that if you like put as much as you can in the accessibility before launch as much as possible, because then that tells players that okay, there's stuff that's there that's great, and it will allow more players to be able to play, which also means more money because people will be buying more people will be buying your game. So accessibility does add in a financial incentive for that as well. But being able to take feedback from the community and being like, okay, if this could be adjusted or this could be adjusted or this could be added, it would really help out. Being able to include accessibility as part of your content updates, that really does help out a lot, and actually kind of tells the players that, hey, we're dedicated to accessibility in our game and in our properties, and we want to be able to keep continuing to support that and make adjustments and taking that feedback from players. And because there's a lot of games that actually have been able to do that even post launch. Ghost of Tsushima is one of those games that wasn't super accessible when it first came out, but every single update they had for over a year, including actually some of the updates even was still released recently, they were like over a year, every single update had an accessibility update, and actually was probably the most improved game that I ever saw, that improved a ton for accessibility. Was it fully accessible by the end of their updates? No, but it was at least way more accessible than when they had it at launch. And so I encourage you, it's never too late to include accessibility in your games.
So yeah, I guess my maybe final question before we go is, it's more just a personal question. Yesterday they announced the Innovation and Accessibility Awards, the Game Awards. I was just wondering if you had a favorite of who'd like to win.
See, that's an interesting question because I did work on some of them. I will say though, I think probably out of what I was really happy about is at least because I was actually on the jury of helping to choose the nominations for that category this year. Actually, also for the previous years they had it. And I was very happy with the choices that they had in there, because it kind of ranged from not only AAA but all the way down to indie. And I always appreciated that about the accessibility category at the Game Awards. Like even last year, even though Forza Horizon won that category, there was a game in there called The Veil, which is an extremely great game. If you want to find like an audio only game that is extremely accessible for blind players, check out The Veil: Shadow of the Crown. I believe it's still on Xbox Game Pass. It's an amazing blind game that there is no visuals whatsoever. It's all audio, and you want to know how a great blind game is for that check that out. But I love that was included as like a nomination, even though it couldn't win. I'd say probably though the one I Would out of all of that, what was in the category? I think God of War probably is the one that that I'm shooting for as the favorite to win. With a close second being like The Last of Us Part One, because they did include a lot of accessibility in that too. So.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for taking time and sort of chatting with us today. It's been so useful, I'm sure, for everyone here, and it's sort of just been great to hear directly sort of from you, and you've given us some great ideas and some really good feedback. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for joining in. I super appreciate it. And if there's anything you want, again, I'm available if you want to be able to chat more about accessibility, or just want some consultation on what you're working on. Please feel free to give me a shout, and I would love to be able to work with you.